Welcome back. It's Saturday, June 20th, 2026, Plane Time 33, a production of the Florida Aviation Network. We're into segment 2 right now. In the first segment, we introduced Pat Phillips, aviation attorney, and now recently inducted into the Florida Aviation Hall of Fame. We got to know him a little bit better in the first segment. In the second segment, we're going to get to know his approach to things like aeronautical decision-making and risk management. That's where I really want to get a connection with the audience as to what you guys can use out there to plan your next safe flight. We'll get into that. Another programming note, after our second segment is over, we'll bring on the great George Bartuska, our weather guy, to talk about summertime flying, especially thunderstorms, the anatomy of a thunderstorm, and the avoidance of a thunderstorm. A lot of good stuff happening today. Sit back with a cup of joe, relax for segment 2 on Florida's Aviation Network, Plane Time number 33. We've got Wings Knowledge Credit available to you today. Stand by at the end of my segment here for how to obtain Wings Knowledge Credit for our live viewers watching at home today. We'll make sure that you get your Wings Knowledge Credit and get credit when you apply it with the other credits properly. You can get a flight review knocked out. If you didn't know that about Wings program, ask me when you reach out for Wings credit today, because I'm also a Wings Pro. My name is Bob Jex, former Fast Team Program Manager with the Orlando FSDO, now happily honored to be serving with the Florida Aviation Network. And I'm very, very glad to bring back our special guest for segment 2, Pat Phillips, aviation attorney and Florida Aviation Hall of Fame. Pat, welcome again to our stage. We had a wonderful session in segment 1. In segment 2, I want to get into a little bit of your experience, your operational expertise with flying, planning a flight. You went from flying in the military and flying as a civilian before that. You went from that into the air show business and flew a number of air show routines. One is relatively high risk, whereas the others are relatively low risk. How do you make the jump from relatively low risk flying to much higher risk? How do you approach that, and how you've done it successfully and safely? How do you make that transition to increasing risk in flight planning and flight operations?
Well, that's a good question, Bob. And I think you could probably sum it up in how do you make the transition from a low risk to high risk, or something relatively more complex, is preparation. You don't do it blindly. You've got to get in there and you've got to understand what you're getting into. You've got to understand the machine, and you've got to get into the mechanics of the machine, and you've got to understand everything there is that you can about the machine and the airplane, then understand what you can about yourself and the maneuvers, and then you got the mission you've got to perform. And again, you've got to have studied that out and practiced it.
There's so much going on now. So much has changed in flight planning and flight training since the earliest days when you got your start. A lot has changed. Some of it's better. Some of the same problems seem to be rearing their heads again and again. Lack of proper knowledge before taking a flight is one of those risks. Do you study the POH more, or do you study the regulations more when you're getting into a new aircraft? Do you study notes from other pilots? Do you talk to other pilots? Maybe all the above when you're getting transitioning to an aircraft that is unfamiliar to you.
Oh, it would be all of the above. Again, nothing aggravates me more. In fact, people see me actually get mad about it when you can see somebody taking a cavalier attitude. Let's say for jumping into a multi-engine airplane that they haven't really flown before, and with the attitude, that they obviously don't know, they don't want to know, and that's what doesn't work. And I think I just see that happening regularly, because I guess I'm fanatical on, you want to get in there and learn everything about there is that's relevant to what your airplane, your equipment, your mission, yourself, and you've got to study for all that. Like you said, you've got to talk to other pilots. see what they can say about it. That's one of your best sources, is talking to other people that have done it before and find out what's critical. I mean, you check out in a new airplane, for instance, I said a multi-engine airplane, you've got to learn the critical airspeeds for things, and you get that out of the pilot operating handbook. So that's the reason you need to go through the pilot operating handbook, and particularly paying close attention to, again, the performance parameters of the airplane, and know where the envelope lies, and stay within the envelope and know what's critical. You know, like for somebody who's flying a Bonanza for the first time, they need to know where the landing gear crank is to hand crank the landing gear down, and how many turns it takes, and just little things like that. Because if that's obviously, if there's a problem and they don't have the knowledge, they're not going to be able to deal with the problem, and then that's when accidents happen, and that's when people like myself get upset when I realize that they didn't take the opportunity to think ahead and to learn the systems in the airplane.
I don't get to ask this question too often to anybody, but as a highly seasoned and experienced aviation attorney, and I know you cover a wide range of cases, is there one type of rule or one particular regulation that seems to be violated more than the others? For example, pre-flight planning, 91103, is that violated more in your experience? Do you see that being violated more, or is it medical certification problems? Where's the peak on that curve as the number of violations compared to the others?
Well, that one's kind of a hard one for me to formulate.
It would be unique to you because every other attorney would have a different answer.
I'm gonna give you an example. Federal Air Regulation 6115. Federal Air Regulation 6115 talks about motor vehicle actions, and this is the one that we see a great number of, and the pilot community doesn't see much of it because people don't talk about it. But that is what was, for a long time, was one of the most widely violated regulations out there, because what that means is somebody is arrested for a DUI in the state of Florida. Within 60 days, they're supposed to report it to the Civil Aviation Division in Oklahoma City. 60 days. And most people don't, because they don't know about the regulation. And about a year later, that once they finish the process, they don't report anything. The FAA catches up with them a year later, and they will suspend their license minimally 30 days, maybe 60. I've seen some of them 90, depends upon how egregious the case was. But it always ceased to amaze me of the number of violations on that statute that we don't talk about in the aviation world enough. Now, maybe that's deviating from the question you're
No, it's actually spot on to what I wanted to get into. It's a very important thing for the audience to know, that we all hope that motor vehicle action doesn't happen to any pilot, but if it does, you need to know what the regulations say.
And you've got to follow it to a T, and there's a lot of little detail in it. As long as you follow it and do what the regulation says. The interesting thing is, somebody gets arrested for a DUI, tell them. I mean, as long as it's not your third or fourth one, and you're not going to hear any more about it, most likely.
I have a question for you. You may not even be comfortable answering it, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Any stories about close calls, lessons learned from those close calls that you might want to share with the audience? Maybe not. It's not something that anybody that freely admits on something, and I'm not going to hold you to it. I may have put you on the spot.
No, I don't mind sharing that. Yes, you talk about close calls. I'll go back to the air show. My early days of flying air shows in the Stearman. I was doing low-level aerobatics in a stock Stearman with a Continental 220 engine in it, and the reason I liked flying the stock Stearman is the airplane was designed for the Continental or the Lycoming engine to start with, and it was pretty agile, it was pretty versatile, but it was obviously underpowered. So the thing you really had to go in there and study, I did everything. I never saw above 800 feet. Everything was from surface to 800 feet. And it was the energy management. because, I mean, you know, you got to go downhill to get airspeed to get into the next maneuver. And even learn some tricks about energy management, which is something you don't read about or hear about. The air show community doesn't talk about, but you can dive down into the area of the ground cushion. You can get down 8-10 feet above the ground, and you get in that air cushion, you can pick up a lot of airspeed real fast.
You're singing my song. I love that topic of energy management.
You could pick up 10 and 20 miles an hour. Stearman measured miles an hour, so I'm still thinking miles an hour. I know everything is knots now. But you know, little things like that for the energy management. But I did have a close call one time. At 400 feet, I'd do 2 slow rolls. The reason I was doing 2 slow rolls because the old military guys used to say you can't do a real slow roll in the Stearman, and then doing 2 was kind of extraordinary. Well, I ended up on my second slow roll. I ended up dishing out, and I'm glad I started at 400 feet because it was kind of nerve-wracking. But anyway, got through it. But it gives you it's a learning experience. You go back and you learn and figure out what happened. And I found out, you know, what happened on this one is it had a non-inverted fuel system in the airplane. In fact, it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy getting a surface level aerobatic waiver in the Stearman without an inverted system. But I did not put the inverted system because I wanted to keep it stock, and that was part of the showmanship because it would backfire and fire would come out as you come back, and it would start running again. Well, I figured out what happened is I went into my second roll and didn't give the engine time to restart, being too anxious. So that's where I added something to my checklist. Once I finished the first roll was check engine running, full power, then hesitate, then do the second one. But that was kind of a neat thing about flying air shows, flying the stock Stearman, because in the 80s and the 90s, when I would go back and park after the air show, I'd usually have at least 5 or 10 the old World War II pilots that learned to fly Stearman. They'd be looking at the airplane. They'd be looking at the engine. They'd be looking at the engine all mystified, say, "What'd you do to that engine? What did you do to that engine?" And tell them, "Didn't do anything. It's a stock Continental 220 engine, just like you learned to fly." And you know, you did your maneuvers at a higher altitude, because, you know, the focus on the energy, you didn't have to worry about the energy management at high altitude. That wasn't the point. The point was for the folks to learn how to do the maneuvers and learn what a loop looked like, what a roll looked like, and that kind of thing. But that was, I guess, that's kind of the highlight. But I always look forward to that every time when I'd see a crowd of those guys standing around, and I knew what they were going to ask about the engine and what'd you do to that engine. In fact, I could make bets with you. I says, "Come with me at the end. You're going to see people asking about what did you do to that engine." But again, your question was, you have a close call. You get back and analyze every segment of it, of what happened, and figure out what you need to add to your checklist, what you need to do to prevent it, avoid it, make sure it doesn't happen a second time.
A lot of air show performers have even their practice sessions videotaped.
Yes.
For analysis. Yeah.
Yeah, they do that more and more now, which
Sure.
is very beneficial.
Yeah.
That's why the air show business is reasonably safe, and a lot safer than it was in the early days.
Yeah. I mean, the audience, you know, is amazed that the aircraft can do what they can do, but the performers know that they can manage their risks. They're careful about managing them, and you were no different when you were flying air show routines. It's the same thing. What is your approach to transitioning into an aircraft that is unfamiliar to you? What advice would you give to people who are going through a training pipeline to become professional pilots, who will be going through a succession of aircraft and instructors, really? But it starts with the aircraft. Any advice to those people who are going through a succession of aircraft as part of their training?
Well, I mean, the obvious advice is get a check out in the airplane. I mean, back in the old days, even World War II guys talk about it, and when I first learned to fly, it was normal process. Just you fly one airplane, go jump into another airplane. I remember I first pretty well checked myself out in the Cessna 182. and which had a controllable speed propeller. Read about it and studied it, and I'm thinking you wouldn't see much of that happening now, because I think the flight schools are a lot stricter on it. People are now aware. The Wings program making people awareness is the important thing of the necessity of studying the airplane, learning the airplane. You got to do more than just read the pilot operating handbook. Get a feel for what it says, and again emphasize the critical things for that airplane, what you need to know, and especially jumping into a different multi-engine airplane. 40, 50 years ago, people think nothing of jumping into a multi-engine airplane they hadn't flown before and just kind of figure it out. But I think we just don't do that today. I mean, I have done it in years past, but even when I did it in years past, I studied the POH from cover to cover before I would get in any airplane I'm not familiar with, and learn the emergency procedures and talk to other pilots as to what to look for might be a problem. I mean, I think of an example. I jumped in with a fellow when I was flight instructor, and I had a Baron. It was a early Baron, and got out on the end of the runway to take off, turn the fuel boost pumps on like you normally do, and the engine quit. Because in that particular model Baron, you weren't supposed to turn the fuel pump switches on unless the engine quit during takeoff, because it would flood the engine.
Oh boy!
So I remember we taxied back and had to study that when you turned the fuel boost pumps on, the engine quit.
When all else fails, read the instructions.
And it's kind of embarrassing telling the tower you got to taxi back and check something, but I remember doing that. But that's, again, what happens if you don't read the operating handbook thoroughly enough.
Let's talk about Mosaic a little bit.
Okay.
We've got a whole new class of pilot certification. We've got a whole new class of aircraft that are about to hit the marketplace. In July of last year, they introduced Mosaic Phase 1 out at AirVenture, and in late October, it went into effect. The public has known about this rule coming. There's been an extensive effort from a number of people developing the Mosaic body of regulations. It's not just one rule, it's a set of rules affecting numerous parts of the federal aviation regulations. How is Mosaic going to change the aviation industry, and how is it going to change your profession as a pilot and as an attorney?
I think that's a good question, and
it's a loaded question, admittedly.
Going back to the regulations, those are still being formulated and put together, and I think it was 600 pages of volume of material. I even tried looking at it and gave up on it. But I mean, the critical thing is the Mosaic expanded the airplanes that have the ability to be flown by a light sport pilot. And a lot of it depends on whether we see the development and the growth of the light sport pilot area. And that's what we're looking for is to grow more light sport pilots, because the first thing everybody complains about when they want to learn to fly is the expense. Well, light sport pilot is a way of learning to fly at a lesser expensive way. It's because you only have to have 20? I didn't review that 20 hours.
It's 20 hours.
You only have to have 20 hours, and then you're a light sport pilot, and you can go fly. You go fly and take pass at one passenger, and pretty well fly where you want to fly as long as it's daylight and it's VFR. So it's a great opportunity for folks that don't want to spend a lot of money to get a private license and to just fly for fun and fly on beautiful sunny days. And that's always, hopefully it's going to bring in more people into the pilot world, and people start building new light sport airplanes to meet the criteria. I mean, myself personally, I appreciate the light sport pilot rules, because I had some medical issues a while back, so I didn't renew my medical certificate. So that's one reason I had a Cub for 10 years. I could fly my Cub legally because it was a light sport airplane. Weighed 1,320 pounds, which was the light sport criteria.
Back then.
Well, now on the new Mosaic, the weight limit has been eliminated, and the airplane can qualify. You can fly as a light sport pilot in an airplane as long as it, you can correct me, if I'd known you were going to ask that question, I would recheck my numbers. I think it's 58 knot.
59.
59
for
knots.
VH or VS1.
Yeah.
VS1, yeah.
59 knots with the flaps down.
Well, the Cub doesn't have flaps.
No, the Cub doesn't have it. As long as it stalls, as long as it stalls less than 59 knots, it's a light sport airplane. So anybody can fly it on a light sport license. And so hopefully you get more people flying you get more light sport pilots. More light sport pilots are going to buy more airplanes, and you're going to have more light sport airplanes produced, and it's going to be a boom for the industry. And I think we're watching that happen now. There's still several light sport airplanes that are. Another thing about a light sport airplane, it's made to the ASTM standards, and which is the standard is not the same standard as the old Part 43. The regulations required for a standard airworthiness certificate in an airplane. You can build an airplane as long as it meets the test ASTM. Those are the consensus standards that all the engineers agree that if your nuts and your bolts and your materials meet their testing standards, it's good to use in an airplane. And so it expands the available materials to build an airplane, and therefore you can build one and sell it commercially cheaper. So hopefully it's going to be a boom to our airplane community.
I think Mosaic will enable people who, like you said, people who maybe couldn't get in an aircraft, now will be able to get in and fly them as pilots. It'll enable a new class of aircraft to be put into the marketplace where maybe affordability was a problem before. A brand new Seminole cost, the better part of $1 million. Most people don't have that kind of money. But some of these new light sport aircraft that are coming along, and including some twins that will qualify under this new Mosaic Phase 2 as light sport aircraft, that will be very, very liberating when those aircraft hit the marketplace.
Well, I think one of the big liberating things was there used to be a light sport, there was only room for the pilot and one passenger, and it could only be a 2-seat airplane. Now that it's expanded, you can have 4 seats in the airplane. I believe it's 4.
It's even more than that.
6 seats.
6 seats, yeah.
It's up to 6 seats. You could have 6 seats in the airplane, but still only 2 people, the pilot and the passenger in the airplane. But it's expanded the number of airplanes available for the light sport pilot. That was the problem. The light sport pilots just didn't have airplanes available to fly. Now it's a whole gamut of airplanes. Cessna 182s, like you say, some twin-engine airplanes will qualify.
Is there something we should watch for in the pilot community of a broader, the gates are opening wider. Is there something we need to watch for or screen for in this new group of pilots who are coming in for training in light sport aircraft? Is there something that we should be, as an instructor community, that we should be alert for?
Yes, they're pilots. They've got to take it seriously, and they've got to take their responsibilities of safety very serious. And again, as I'd said earlier, that goes into studying all the materials that are relevant to your airplane, to your mission, to yourself as a pilot, and that includes the federal air regulations. They need to be studied and understood. And I think I have seen it. People say, well, I'm going to be a light sport and just go out and learn to fly and go fly. And I've explained to them it's a lot more to it than just learning how to manipulate the controls or how to fly the airplane or control the airplane. You've got to learn the whole area that involves aviation. And you've got to understand, and, we haven't mentioned airspace. We've got a very complex airspace out here, especially here in Central Florida when you think about the Class B airspace and the Class C airspace over Daytona and Sanford. Yeah, you asked before about it. I've had quite a few people get violated take off out of Sanford, and they'll fly up into the Class B airspace because they climb too fast. And they forget about it, that you got a Class B over top of the Class C airspace.
What advice would you give to young people who are considering one type of profession or another, and somebody throws out aviation to them? Do you want to consider aviation as a career field, perhaps operations as a pilot, maintenance, as a mechanic?
Mm-hmm.
What advice would you give to young people? Because you've been extensively involved in the Young Eagles program. What should the young people who are contemplating career choices know about aviation? What should they consider before they make that choice?
Well, I tell them they've got to hang around aviation people. Tell them they need to join the EAA. They need to join the AOPA. Start reading their publications, because there are great opportunities in maintenance. I emphasize maintenance. Everybody doesn't have to be a pilot, but a lot of people, I see kids, they like working on their cars. They need to think about the maintenance end. But they're going to have to hang around the aviation world to decide what avenue they want to go through. Or I'm referring to my wife Barbara has her introduction to aviation classes for kids age 12 to 17 every Saturday morning at Orlando Executive Airport. It's an 8-week course, and it's the best course in the world to sit through that course and decide what you would like to be in the aviation community. And she gets a lot of kids. They decide they want to go maintenance, or they just want to work in operations. They want to be air traffic controllers, which I hadn't thought so much about it, but you get quite a few that are interested in being air traffic controllers, or be pilots. And I tell them about, working for major airlines has got to be the best, you don't want to call it a job, but best profession in the world. And when you look at the thing as a whole, and I think that's the reason a lot of people are looking at it now as a whole. And so it's gotten folks interested. Everybody's heard there's a pilot shortage. The pilot shortage probably isn't as bad as it sounds, but the jobs are there, the opportunities are there to be taken advantage of, and the pay scale on the major airlines, especially if you're an international pilot, is certainly a worthwhile occupation. It's worth somebody looking into and doing it. But it's going to have to come from internally from that person. It doesn't work being a pilot if they're a pilot because somebody told them they had to be.
You're going to be in town for July 4th, our 250th birthday?
I think we will.
Good. I hope to see you carving holes in the sky in that Stearman, that beautiful Stearman of yours. Folks, I've had a wonderful time interviewing the great Pat Phillips, and I hope to have him back on our stage one day. He's a great guest, knows an awful lot. We could go for 2 segments on just his community service, never mind his attorney accomplishments and his pilot accomplishments. He's a wonderful man, and I hope you've gotten a sense of that. We're going to be taking a break in just a moment here. When we come back, we'll bring in Dr. George Bartuska talking about the perils of thunderstorms and how to avoid them. We look forward to having you back here on Plane Time. Take a break. We'll see you in just a few minutes. Thank you very much for joining us today on Father's Day weekend. And once again, happy Father's Day to all the dads out there. Bob Jex for the Florida Aviation Network. So long.